kids are trouble down the road, Pastor. Keep your eye on him, a farmer said to my parents one morning. My mother answered, he's a good boy, as if she were really saying, back off, mister. My father smiled, adding, we'll keep him straight, as if he were saying, but thank you for your concern. Thankfully, my boyhood revelations came not only from Methodism, but also from nature. My parents would wake me from my sleep and take me canoeing on Carl's Lake under the moonlight. My mother would make popcorn in the air popper and fill a brown paper grocery bag. My father would paddle us into the middle of the lake, my mother and I digging out handfuls of popcorn, my father reading stories from books, making special voices for each character, our own special ritual in our own sanctuary. The best stories he told were taken from collections of world mythology, Native American folklore, and romantic poetry. Stories like the Odyssey, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, and Black Elk Speaks. I remember one evening in particular, the way certain moments from earliest childhood must stay with you even to old age. I was only 4 years old. My parents had taken me onto the lake in a canoe. It was springtime and there was no moon in the sky. Why does the moon go away, I asked. Well, it's just like everything, my dad said. The moon rises and sets, it waxes and wanes, and gets big and full, then it goes away until we can't see it, and then it comes back again. A giant rock bass jumped out of the water and splashed back under, then another and another. Splash after splash in the shining scales of silver fish in the night, the quiet lake became a frenzy under the stars. Daddy, Daddy, why are the fish trying to get out of the lake? They're feeding on the flies, my dad answered. The flies only live for a few hours, my dad said to himself, resting his paddle across his knees. They serve a purpose. God's creation is quite mysterious, my mother replied. She breathed a deep and reverent sigh, as if she were looking at something far beyond what her eyes could see. Compared to the inspirational contemplativeness of my parents, people at church seemed uninterested in mysteries like the stars and the moon. Christian rituals on Sundays were tiresome and dull in contrast to the curiosity I felt all the way down to my bones while sitting in the canoe at night. Increasingly, the paradox of these two worlds embossed themselves into my very DNA. The bright colors of the sky, legends and poetry, the silence of the prairies and rattle of the cornfields, but also the sermons and lifeless rituals in the sanctuary, people upright and tight behind suits and handshakes, and gossip around tables about, quote, sin, or how a certain farmer was, quote, taking to the bottle, or, quote, falling away from God again. Over and over, I tried diverting my parents' attention from church members during inappropriate moments, raising my hand during a sermon, tugging at my father's robe while he tried to speak to people after the worship service, or asking my mother if we could go for a canoe ride in front of the parishioners. Always trying to claim my turf, claim a sanctuary of my own. One morning, when my mother taught children Sunday school, I made my boldest attempt. I was 5 years old. Let's close our eyes and say a prayer, children, my mother said. Well, my mother closed her eyes and began to pray. Dear God, we thank you for this beautiful morning. I scanned the room for children not closing their eyes. I spotted a young boy named Jeremiah. He picked his nose and wiped the boogers on his orange plastic chair. When my mother finished the prayer, I raised my hand urgently, kicking my legs back and forth. Mommy, I said, Jeremiah didn't have his eyes closed during the prayer. How do you know he didn't have his eyes closed, my mother asked me. Because I watched him, I said. He picked his boogers and he did not have his eyes closed. But for you to see him, my mother answered, you must have had your eyes open too. She smiled at me as if I were not her son, but one of her students, the same as everybody else in the classroom. My lips quivered and hot tears streamed down my face. It was hard for me to understand the way in which my parents were both distant and separate from the parishioners in mood and affectation, but also among the people, trying to be the same as them and holding me, the preacher's kid, to the same rules as the parishioners. Naturally, as a young boy, I felt in limbo, suspended between worlds of judgment and acceptance, rules and intuition, tradition and freedom, mystery and certainty. Since each world carried spiritual jargon and talk about God or the Holy Spirit, my impressions of Christianity were confusing. The very word God was a moving symbol for the different sanctuaries I inhabited. One sanctuary always seemed in competition with another, one trying to get love from a dry well, the other simply feeling loved, like fresh lake water throughout the seasons, always turning over. So that's a little excerpt from the backstory. I'm going to read this last little piece here, which goes back to the ayahuasca ceremony where we left off. And this chapter is called La Purga, and it describes the event of purging, which can be pretty intense. Purging during an ayahuasca ceremony is not like performing normal bodily functions. In holistic health and yoga communities, the mind-body connection is emphasized. People meditate to be more present, thinking less and experiencing more, clearing the head of mental detritus. More extreme detoxifying hot yoga classes have become popular all across the United States. Bikram's yoga class, for example, a 90-minute workout including 2 sets of 26 postures and 2 breathing exercises in a 100-plus degree room with 50% humidity, was designed to detoxify the body and mind. People go to saunas to sweat out holiday debauchery, while ecstatic dance and Pilates awaken the repressed feminine. The list of metaphors and exercise practices related to both psychological and bodily detoxification could go on, but nothing I have experienced comes anywhere close to what it feels like to purge and detoxify the body and mind in an ayahuasca ceremony. Ayahuasca purging is in a league of its own. When I purge during an ayahuasca ceremony, it is not just the physical release, and it's not just the emotional, spiritual, or psychological release, but the phenomenal combination of all of the above in an astronomically unique event that makes the purge life-altering. A scream becomes the unique story of an entire lifetime, reaching out into the periphery of individual freedom and diva-like melody. By screaming, you reclaim something repressed, fragmented, or forgotten. The sound of vomiting is inhumanely grotesque, painful, relevant, funny, and finally desperate, until somewhere a mountain crumbles and boulders drop like rain off the side of a cliff centuries old and steeped in words like karma and original sin. Every muscle of the body forces bile and stress out of your soul, and it's not just vomit. It's everything you've been holding on to for something like the past 6 years. People releasing baggage like typhoons and avalanches. At the same time, it's not all painful or scary. Laughter during an ayahuasca ceremony is like the reunion of thousands of lost children within you, and is often accompanied by tears and sobs like earthquakes, until you laugh so hard you vomit again like the birth of a star. This purge is soul-shifting. It's the plate tectonics of your reality. People don't just lose it when they purge. They feel every shred of their existence, of what it really means to be human, until they might burst, and then they explode and survive anyway. I remember how my very first ayahuasca purge started, evolved, and finally finished my first night at El Puma Negro Lodge. It was raining hard outside the mesa. Thunder boomed over the tops of the trees. Branches snapped and fell as the larger sentinels of the jungle ran for cover, stirring up birds and the sounds of flapping wings in the undergrowth. The rodent-sized lodge dog, Cucaracha, growled and barked. The vibration of the crickets grew louder and then vanished. Several splashes sounded off one after another, and reptiles disappeared into the brown river. The sound of rain ricocheted off the water. The Icaro had changed. The pace of Ethan's melody had quickened, as if Ethan's Icaro was stirring the soup of a large, boiling cauldron, gradually building momentum. The medicine song gathered everybody in the circle into the same vision. Each time the melody dipped into the haunting minor notes, I could feel myself getting sicker. I saw the mesa sitting inside of a canoe, each one of us lying limp in the hull. It was the same canoe my family had taken out on the lakes during my childhood. The waters were dark and the banks of the river covered in shadows and trees. Red eyes peered at us from the forest. Ethan, who had morphed into a life-size golden hornet, hovered above the canoe. His translucent wings buzzed at the speed of light. Small sparks of electric white and silver burst off from their tips as he paddled us downriver. Each stroke of Ethan's paddle fell in sync with the rising and falling of the Icaro melody. Each stroke was also the sound of his shakapa leaf rattle, the vague but persistent reminder that I had taken ayahuasca. As the speed of our journey downriver increased with each paddle stroke, I felt dizzier and dizzier, until I woke in the mesa to find myself on my knees, hovering over my purge bucket in the dark. I choked on stomach acid. My jaw unhinged so wide I thought my eyes might burst. A giant black viper poured out of my mouth. I fell forward as mucus spilled into my bucket. "Nice healing," Ethan said to me. His shakapa whisked over the top of my head. For a moment I saw the glowing orange of his cigar near my face, Then a cloud of the mapacho smoke covered me, and although it was dark, I could see the smoke as if it were a glowing white halo. It smelled sickly sweet. The black viper swam inside the bucket. Ethan's face gyrated in front of mine, half hornet and half human being. Thousands of golden sparks danced around his face. "How you feeling?" he asked me. "I don't know," I said. I looked down at the bucket to see the black viper was gone. In its place were rainbow strands of light shooting back and forth. Until that moment, I had only read about the purging of an ayahuasca ceremony in books and magazines. I knew the purge could be life-changing, violent, and terrifying,